Good evening, everyone. My name is Vivian Lee, and I'm an urban planner at the National Capital Planning Commission. I want to welcome you tonight to NCPC. We are happy to help the United States National Arboretum and the Agricultural Research Service of the United States Department of Agriculture host the National China Garden Joint National Environmental Policy Act and Section 106 scoping meeting. Tonight, you will learn about the National China Garden Project and have an opportunity to provide comments. Please note that the meeting is being videotaped and recorded. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to the National Garden China team to learn more about the project. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Dina Roadside, and I'm with Roadside and Harwell, and I'm delighted to see you here tonight. I wanted to mention that this session is being videotaped, and so hence the microphones, and if you have a question, we can pass the microphone on to you as well. The project partners for the China Garden Environmental Assessment Project are, thank you, the United States Department of Agriculture, the Agricultural Research Service, ARS, the National Arboretum, and the National China Garden Foundation. In addition to that, the lead agency for the NEPA, EA, and Section 106 process is the Agricultural Research Service of USDA, with the National Capital Planning Commission as the cooperating agency. The purpose of our meeting tonight, we are just at the beginning of the environmental assessment process, which is the scoping part of the process. And the purpose of this meeting is to gather initial and early input into the scope of the issues that we will be looking at in the environmental assessment and in the Section 106 consultation. And it is also to enable interested parties to both learn more about the project and have an opportunity to have input into the process. During this session, I hope you've had a chance to browse the displays, and I hope you will give us comments, ask questions. We will be happy to get back to you with answers to your questions if you leave your contact information. We wanted to start out a little bit by talking about the project background, and I would like to turn the podium over at this moment to Dr. Jordan.
Thank you, Dina. For those of you who haven't been to the Arboretum or who have and don't realize that it's not just a park or a beautiful open space in D.C., I want to tell you in a few quick bullet sentences what the Arboretum is and who we are, basically. We were established in 1927. We are the first, we're the only federally funded Arboretum in the United States. What most people don't know is that we are a research institution. We are a 446-acre research, education, public garden whose mission is to enhance the economic, environmental, and aesthetic value of landscape plants through long-term, multidisciplinary research, conservation of genetic resources, and interpretive gardens and educational exhibits. Let's go the right way. I'm going to briefly give you some background information on the history of the project. First of all, I want to indicate that it is a strong, sincere United States-China collaboration. Formal agreements have been signed between the United States and Chinese governments to construct the China Garden. Two separate documents signed in 2004 and 2011. The project has been affirmed several times as a priority of initiative for enhancing the bilateral relations in the United States-China strategic and economic dialogue. So very important for both the United States and China in that realm of influence. There are two components to the China Garden. There's what you see above ground, and there's what you don't see below ground. The Chinese team has done a concept design and will design and construct the above ground elements. The Chinese will be donating what you see here, the word structures, but that involves more things than what you think by a structure. It is buildings, it is plants to a certain degree, it is masonry, it is rockeries, and you'll hear about those things in a few minutes in more detail. The U.S. design team will be responsible for the underground elements, the infrastructure, as well as the maintenance and ensuring the compliance with U.S. code and regulations. So there's two sets of teams that are working concurrently together for this project, the Chinese team and the U.S. team. There are several milestones that this could actually be 3 or 4 slides. We try to condense this for tonight's meeting. The letter of intent was originally signed in 2003 to establish a China Garden Joint Working Group, which I alluded to a moment ago. In 2006, with great hopes in mind, the China Garden site was dedicated at the U.S. National Arboretum. We still have the stone that was used for that dedication at the Arboretum. In 2007, when we redid our National Arboretum Master Plan, there was a recommendation for the Chinese Garden at the Arboretum, and the site was located on the map in the Master Plan, and that was approved by National Capital Planning Commission and Commission of Fine Arts. In 2008, U.S. Congress, through the U.S. Farm Bill, gave the U.S. Secretary of Agriculture the authority to build the China Garden on 12 acres, and this says undeveloped land. We prefer to say underutilized area of the National Arboretum, a large meadow, and gave the Secretary the authority to raise private funds for the garden construction and maintenance. There were to be no U.S. appropriated funds for the garden at this point. In 2011, because of that, the National China Garden Foundation was formed and incorporated as a 501c3 nonprofit corporation to lead the fundraising work and to work with the U.S. Department of Agriculture to construct, maintain, and provide cultural programming for the China Garden, and Sandra will speak to that in a minute. In 2013, Page Sutherland Page was hired as the design team, and they were, of course, engaged by the National China Garden Foundation. Also in 2013 was the 7th U.S.-China National China Group Working Group meeting held at the Arboretum, so there were 6 before that. In November of the same year, we had our 8th meeting actually in China. We were invited by the Chinese team to come actually see the structures, the China Garden, the classical China gardens that they were talking about that we had only seen by either concept or blueprints. And I must say, as part of that team, we have a much better understanding of what they mean when they say classical China garden and the elements, which again will be spoken of in a few minutes. In 2014, a China Garden Honorary Committee was formed, and the 9th U.S.-China National China Group Garden Working Group meeting was held. What's not on here is 2015, which we're going to hold the 10th U.S.-China Working Group meeting in June. And having said that, that will be led by our new Arboretum Director, Dr. Richard Olson, who is in the audience today. At this point, I'll turn this over for the next set of slides to Sandra Gibson, who's the Executive Director of the National China Garden Foundation.
Great, thank you. Good evening. I'm very pleased to be here on behalf of the foundation, which, as Ramon said, was formed 4 years ago to oversee the project. We're operating under 2 memoranda of understanding with the U.S. Department of Agriculture and the Agricultural Research Service. So the purpose of the project, the intended purpose, is to create the finest example of a classical Chinese garden in the United States. It's going to be one of the largest of these types of gardens. And these gardens feature this harmonious balance between man-made elements and elements in nature, plants, water, rock formations. The plan is for the National China Garden to become an important cultural destination and center in the nation's capital. And it'll provide an opportunity for visitors here and from around the world to learn from, enjoy, and gain a deeper appreciation for the profound influence of China's history of horticulture, garden design, and cultural traditions. We plan for it to be a focal point for cultural activities. The foundation will operate programs year-round at the garden, as well as a vibrant link between the U.S. and China. And we want it to be a living classroom, a center for the study, appreciation, and practice of traditional Chinese culture. And it'll have several beautifully designed and furnished spaces for meetings, conferences, and special events. There'll be public tours, and again, year-round cultural and educational activities. And it'll be publicly accessible as a destination. and it must be environmentally sensitive to the needs of the Arboretum and to our city. The need for the garden, it has been contemplated as an expression of friendship and cooperation between the United States and China. And Chinese gardens are so beautiful, and this project is a symbol of not only that beauty, but our shared interests as two countries for the long term. It is a collaborative effort, as Ramon mentioned, between both governments who have signed two agreements, the last one in January of 2011. And it does fulfill these mutual commitments, reaffirmed, as Ramon said, during the Strategic and Economic Dialogue. But the project was also featured in Beijing last year as part of the U.S.-China consultation on people-to-people exchange. So we hope it'll go a far way to build new knowledge and understanding and people-to-people relations with the people of the United States and the people of China and advance some of our common objectives. So I think now we'll go back to the team to talk about the process we're undertaking. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. I'd like to spend a few minutes talking about the NEPA and Section 106 processes. Let's talk a little bit about what NEPA is. The National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, Act of 1969 requires federal agencies to consider the impacts of proposed activities, programs, and projects on the human environment. The process for carrying out NEPA requirements includes describing the purpose and need for the proposed action. Sandra has just touched on that. Considering the alternatives, analyzing the environmental impacts in a systematic way with regard to those alternatives, factoring in environmental considerations into all decisions that are made or mitigation measures needed to move forward, etc. And if the analysis shows that there will be no significant impacts, preparing a finding of no significant impact, and completing all of that process before the work is initiated. At the same time, the process is also initiating a Section 106 process. Section 106 came out of the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966, and it requires federal agencies to consider the effects of their actions on historic properties. Those include buildings, structures, objects, sites, including archaeological sites, and districts that are listed in or are eligible for listing in the National Register of Historic Places. Section 106 consultation is conducted with other consulting parties to identify any cultural resources, to assess any adverse effects, and to resolve those effects through either avoidance, minimization, and/or mitigation strategies. So those two processes, the environmental assessment and the Section 106, are happening at the same time and running concurrently. We anticipate the following potential environmental issues that will be explored during this process. They include historic and cultural resources, including archaeology, visual quality, vegetation resources, visitor experience, transportation and parking, land use, stormwater management and water resources, utilities, and sustainability. This process will be considering a build alternative, and we will be talking about what that alternative is in just a minute, and a no-build alternative. What would the impact be, in fact, if the China Garden were not built? In addition to that, in the scoping process that we're currently underway with, we will consider any reasonable alternatives identified during that process as for inclusion in the NEPA process. I would like to introduce Thomas McCarthy from Page Sutherland Page, and Thomas is the principal in charge of the American design team for this project.
Thank you, Dina. And I wanted to talk a bit about the garden and the site. As you're aware, the site is on the National Arboretum, and it is located on Holly Springs Road in the northeast portion of the site, or of the Arboretum rather. And it is Dr. Jordan called it a underutilized site. It is part of the Arboretum. It is a meadow, and it's a site that gently slopes up towards where you see the tree line, and then the Holly Springs Road is on the lower portion of the site. And that is important because of the specific siting and some of the aspects of a Chinese classical garden that I'll talk about in just a minute. There are several key elements that define a classical Chinese garden, and when we think about a classical Chinese garden, we think of more than simply a garden, because a Chinese garden is an art form in China. So there are artists whose principal occupation is designing classical Chinese gardens. So as such, it's a conception that has very carefully studied components, and each component has symbolism, and each component is interrelated to the others. But there are 5 key elements that are part of every classical garden. The rocks that are often referred to, we'll refer to them as rockeries, but they're rock sculptures that define and look like composed mountains, and that help to frame views and to provide a kind of abstract sense of scale. These rocks are also part of the Eastern concept of Taoism, and they're the abodes of the immortals in the Taoist religion. So they have connotations as part of the philosophical framework for the Chinese. As you see, they're oftentimes composed with reflections in water elements. The water elements are both part of the internal framework of a classical Chinese garden, as well as classical Chinese gardens are typically constructed alongside waterways because of their connections to water, and because of the views that are framed of the garden within water, and kind of the life-giving concepts and conceptions of water. So their representation along with water is always very important. I've described the views, and the views are framed by the man-made interventions, both the rocks, the pavilions and structures, the walls, the gates, and other framed views. Typically, there are scenic views to the mountainside. So oftentimes these gardens are located are near mountains, and the views to the mountains are also framed as part of the scenic views. So the location here with coming up from Hollyhock towards the hillside is also important as part of the overall siting for the project, and helps give form to the location of some other site elements. There's also, obviously it is a garden, and the plants that are chosen and are used in Chinese gardens are plants that help to demonstrate man's place in nature and the passing of time and the seasons. The plants are typically robust, and fortunately there are a lot of cultures and a lot of plants, and I'm going to not use plant terms more than I'm aware, because I have the experts with me, but there are plants that fortunately have been introduced to the United States over the course of many, many years, and we have quite a few of the varietals that we'll be using for the National China Garden that are already in place and being cultivated by the Arboretum. So the plant materials and the plant concepts are part of the overall conception of the garden, clearly. And then the other part is the artwork, and the artwork includes both the buildings and structures, the architecture, but also all aspects of the artwork, from furniture design to calligraphy to performance art that's intended for the space. So it's kind of an overall conception of the artwork, and we'll look at some of the examples. So here you see the rocks being used to frame concepts of structures up on plinths and looking like they're nestled into mountainsides, and then rocks also being assembled to look like they're mountains, and waterfalls cascading from the mountains, providing a sense of scale and a sense of overall distant views. You see the plant material with flowering plants and seasonal variation, and obviously also using the plants to help to frame the views. The water view that you see includes some living aspects of water with koi, and the intention is to have a koi pond, and for the water to help to provide a frame for the distant views, as well as to illustrate some of the beautiful plantings and architecture. And then the scenic views with some of the gate structures are shown, with the circular gate on the upper right, and the bridge gate on the lower image. Talked a little bit about some of the arts and events. The idea is that the National China Garden Foundation, as part of their endowment, is providing funds for ongoing activities at the garden, so as to ensure that the garden remains a destination and isn't or doesn't fall prey to a lack of ongoing funding and ongoing activities. And then lastly, the structures, and as was referred to previously, the structures are all being donated as part of the gift from the Chinese. Our responsibility is to help to ensure that those structures meet the U.S. codes, and that essential services are brought to the structures, that the foundations are appropriate, and that they can be constructed here. But the structures are considered to really be part of the garden artwork. They're actually works of art, and so as such, they're being treated that way. The structures, as we talked about, there are enclosed buildings. So on the site, there are 9 enclosed buildings. There are 6 open-air pavilions that are 4-season pavilions. There are 6 bridge, gate, and corridor elements, and you see on the lower right a corridor element ending in a pavilion. So loggia and corridors are an essential part of a Chinese garden, where you can walk protected from the rain or protected from the sun, and still enjoy the garden. And then there's one pagoda element, which is similar to the one in the upper right-hand image, which will be up on the hillside, and again will help to frame that distant view. I'd like to invite my colleague Wu Li to talk about the National China Garden concept and the layout.
Hi everyone. I'm very glad to be here introducing the National China Garden Concept Plan. Even though I was born and raised in China, I still don't think I've known enough about the Chinese garden. So I'm very lucky to be involved in this project, so I can keep learning. Lifelong learning is what they say, right? Okay, generally speaking, there are 4 parts composing the National China Garden. The first part is this area, and it's called the Girl Garden. And as you can see, this area is the larger walled-in garden compared to the other walled-in garden below. Let's talk about this part first. It's called Go Garden, and it features bigger architecture, relatively bigger ponds in the courtyard, and a bigger rockeries, and all these garden features complementing each other. Being overall, if you want to define the character of this garden figuratively, it's more of a extrovertive and public garden, and but while being grandiose in a way, but also poised. This garden is where visitors will feel their spirit enlivened. And the second part below the Go Garden is called a mountain house of sliced stones. And as you can see, everything is of a smaller scale in this garden. And with comparison with the Go Garden, the mountain house of sliced stone garden is more of introvertive and a more intimate and personal in terms of a visitor's experience. And as you can see, corridors, ponds, waterways, and architecture interlacing with each other, creating the feel that that could remind you of your own backyard private garden, where you could probably hear the nature is murmuring to you. I hope so. And on the as a transition point, here comes a building called Boat Hall, and this pavilion is almost a transition point from more of a man-made garden to more of a natural building. And this building sits on the edge of the lake with a commanding view toward the lake and the hillside beyond. Then the third part of the China Garden is the area called Garden on Lake. As you can see, this area is featured with a central lake with elements surrounding it, including a fish viewing area with a zigzag bridge, and also there is a pavilion called Floating Fragrance Hall, which is supposed to be a tea house, I believe. And keep going on the trail on the lake, you will go into a garden called Peony Garden, where there will be beautiful peonies planted. And keep going. There's a pretty long covered walkway that's called Cultural Corridor, which will be decorated with traditional Chinese arts and crafts. Did I miss something? Oh yeah, there is also a small cascade in a way, and all these elements consist of the lake and garden. And the fourth part of the garden is called Urban Forest, where you can find a 5-pavilion terrace. I believe it will look like. Do we have that slide? Maybe not.
No, you don't have it.
Anyway, a 5-terrace pavilion and also a white pagoda, which as Thomas said, will be looking like this. And that's pretty much the 4 parts of the garden. There's another building which is support service building, where there will be staff members working there. This building can house about 7 to 8 full-time employees. And also the public restrooms are also located in here. So these are pretty much all the components of National China Garden, and they are all besides this building that will be designed by the U.S. team. All the other structures will be designed and constructed after precedents like now existing in China. And here, and this is the plan that we developed with Chinese designers in the year 2013, and in 2015, we got some updated master plan from our Chinese colleagues, and to see it more clearly, we colored the latest plan with the red color and overlaid on the top of the old plan, and you can see the difference and the changes. Number one thing, they've reduced the size of the lake, and mainly for concern on the cost, and also. As you can see, most of the buildings and structures have shifted their locations slightly, and also the pathways are changed also. In addition to all this, the original parking lot has also been relocated to the upper part of the exhibit. And the design process is still going on, and we'll keep the discussion we'll keep the discussion going on as the design process moves on. And this is pretty much it. Thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to spend a few minutes talking about the schedule and where we are on the project right now and the next steps. So we started the scoping process several weeks ago. We're really in the middle of the 30-day scoping phase of the environmental assessment and Section 106. Tonight is the public scoping meeting, and the end of the scoping period will be June 10th. And so if you have comments, we hope that you will provide them tonight, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute, or provide them in the next several days, sometime prior to June 10th, because from that time through the summer and into the fall, we will begin the preparation of the environmental assessment and also begin the Section 106 consultation. In the fall, we will have a draft EA prepared, and we will send that out and make that available for a 30-day public comment period. And so you will have an opportunity to look at that again, look at the EA and comment on it again. And then the final EA decision document will be available in the late fall.